we can start the webinar.
Wait, is Claire not joining us? Oh, I thought she was introducing. Okay, so it's me then. So everyone, welcome to the webinar. Welcome to those people who are watching us online and who are joining us from Groningen in the Netherlands. So the meeting is being conducted in English and in French. So if you want to choose on Zoom at the bottom, we have simultaneous interpretation. So you can listen in the language of your choice, or you can listen in the original language. Alors, si vous voulez entendre en français, vous pouvez changer le langage en bas de Zoom dans interprétation. So we have an exciting webinar planned for you today. It's a virtual and in-person event. So we have people online from around the world to kind of set the ball rolling in the discussion from different international perspectives. And then we have people gathered today in Groningen to have an in-person discussion and to take this further really for solutions for Groningen itself. So the webinar is being hosted by the Water Adaptation Community of the Global Center on Adaptation. The community was created to be a multi-stakeholder platform for knowledge and action supporting scaling up and acceleration of water adaptation. And one of the ways to do that is through sharing knowledge and best practice and really helping to accelerate how we apply best practices across the globe, learning from each other's experience. So the topic of this webinar is scaling up nature-based solutions for adaptation in coastal areas. And we're lucky enough to have people from Denmark, obviously the Netherlands, from the UK. I'm from Canada myself, and we also have people from Senegal. We have really a varied range of experience on the line and in the room, and I want to make sure that people in the virtual room and in the in-person room can also interact. So there will be a chance to join the discussion, and I really encourage you to do that because it makes it much more valuable and you can get much more out of it. We're looking at coastal environments, so the interface with the land and ocean. One of the consequences of global warming, obviously, is an increase in sea levels. And in many places, we're also looking at storm surges. For example, in Canada, we're also looking at differences in sea ice. So there's a whole range of risks that we need to manage. And we have a lot of coastal communities that we need to have a really good plan of how we are going to live with coastal risks and live better with them as well as with nature. So we're going to look at kind of different ways of adapting along the coast and examples of where this is already being taken forward and what the success factors were that helped those projects along the way. So we are going to discuss challenges and opportunities, but obviously I hope that everybody can go away from this webinar with something that they've learned and that will help them kind of, accelerate the movement to putting nature-based solutions into practice, because there are obviously a fair few challenges with this, but I think, there's a lot of discussion of the benefits, but we see that these solutions are still underused. So we want to change that around the world. So yeah, that's the aim of the webinar. In terms of myself, so I am Joanna Akam. I am the Managing Director of Climate Resilient Infrastructure at the INTEC Center on Climate Adaptation, which is based at the University of Waterloo in Canada. So it is actually very early in the morning here for me, so I'm at the wrong end of the time zone. But working with nature is really at the heart of my career. I've worked as a professional geoscientist, mainly geomorphology, for over 20 years in Canada and also in the UK, predominantly on climate adaptation, flood and coastal erosion management, and habitat restoration, which all kind of go together in a nice package. So I've been using my experience recently in Europe to try and accelerate uptake of nature-based solutions in Canada, because it's a little bit more emerging here in Canada than it is in other countries. And I also speak French, so if you want to reach out in either language, that is completely fine. Et je vais essayer de parler un peu des deux langues, surtout avec la discussion avec nos amis au Sénégal, pour que c'est plus interactif. Puis, mais toutefois, on a de traduction, alors vous pouvez écouter dans quelle langue vous voulez. Okay, so maybe if we can go to my presentation now, Nitya. So I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of combining natural and grey infrastructure, particularly with some perspectives from Canada around the work that I've been recently working on, but also to kind of set the table for the discussion. So I have some kind of thought questions at the end that will hopefully fuel our discussions. As a geomorphologist, I've always been passionate about working with natural processes and people and the way we manage our coasts and rivers. And we urgently need a plan for coastal communities. We have a range of solutions in hand. So nature-based solutions is obviously one of them, and that we can achieve multiple benefits. So I'm going to talk about some of those things with some perspectives which kind of mix a little bit actually UK and Canadian experiences. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So coastal adaptation considers flooding and erosion, but also in tandem with people and nature. And I think, you know, the way we work with people and nature, we maybe didn't consider those elements as much when we started off managing flooding and erosion risk. It was more kind of seen as a technical problem to be solved. And we were kind of often controlling natural processes. And I think with climate change, we're now kind of getting to a point where those natural processes are actually kind of more extreme or stronger or more difficult to control. So we are kind of reevaluating how we are living with coastal flooding and erosion, which obviously at the base are also natural processes. So, so we're kind of seeing an international movement towards solutions that are more strategic and long-term. So looking at timescales of up to 100 years rather than just in the short term. Looking at working with natural processes at the functional scale. I have a nice little drawing of a littoral cell, so showing how sediment is naturally eroded, transported, deposited, and we often have come into that and modified these systems. So, you know, we need to be cognizant of what processes are going on and how our interactions have already affected them and how our future interactions will continue to either continue to affect or potentially restore these kind of processes. We look at combining structural and non-structural measures. So, you know, protection is not the only way of coastal adaptation. So I think that's becoming more apparent in how we approach this issue. And combining grey and natural infrastructure solutions. I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit more, but it's not really a choice between the two. We can actually mix them as well, which I can often at some sites is the best solution. But ultimately, nature-based solutions, as I said, are currently underused, and I would also say undervalued. So because they often bring multiple benefits that are more difficult to put into monetary terms. So often we don't appreciate the full value of these solutions. If we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the frameworks that we have been looking at, and it was actually this is a modification of one of my colleagues' framework from the University of Waterloo. So it's the PARA framework that we look at different ways of how we can react or kind of proactively plan for, I should say, for coastal flood risk, sea level rise, and the coastal erosion. So the first and the most traditional approach is to protect. So this is more kind of structural. Traditionally would be structural solutions, so things like seawalls and scar protection, but more and more we are seeing that nature-based solutions are actually being used in this context as coastal protection, where conditions are, good for these systems, because we don't want to put the wrong thing in the wrong place, and it's often, one size does not fit all. So there's protection, so it kind of, defending the line, if you like, or defending, kind of reducing flood risk for coastal communities. Then we might look at accommodate, which is looking at kind of, flood proofing homes, like letting the water in, but just kind of dealing with it when it is in. So looking at wet flood proofing, elevated homes, that kind of thing. The R would be for retreat. So this is where we're looking at where it's actually considered unsustainable or not desirable to continue to protect areas of coast, and we're actually seeing areas kind of set back and habitats restored, and kind of, in the long term, reverting to more natural processes on certain areas of our coast. And then avoid, which is using things like land zoning, land acquisition, etc., to move infrastructure, or to make sure infrastructure is not constructed in the first place in areas at risk. So this is the PARA framework, and actually I've been involved with several discussions with Indigenous groups in Canada at the moment, where we're trying to be much more inclusive and working towards reconciliation with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. And actually some alternatives have come out of those discussions. So whether we should think, because we often think of ourselves as separate to nature, but we could think of ourselves as more part of nature. So alternatives that were discussed, rather than protect, it would be to protect each other. So protect people, but also protect nature at the same time. Accommodate could be seen more as hosting nature. So, living together. Retreat could be classed as move together. So it's not only us that might be moving, it's also coastal systems and coastal ecosystems. And then avoid maybe could be seen as respect. I think I added the last one myself, but it seemed to fit into that terminology. So, so just a way of thinking of how we might, it's not nature and us, it's us within nature. So I think that maybe that can set the tone for the day. If we can go to the next slide, please. So nature-based solutions are not just here to tackle an environmental issue, and are not an environmental kind of, it's not just for the environment that we're doing this. So this is a graph here of catastrophic insurable loss claims in Canada, and we see very strongly that this is going up. And obviously climate change is ongoing. There's many factors underlying this trend. We're now at about $2 billion of insured claims, and this is just obviously those insured claims. So everything that is not insured, which is estimated to be about 3 to 4 times this, is not on the graph, and that's costs being incurred directly by governments, businesses, and individuals. So we're at about $2 billion of insured loss claims. So that's probably more like $6 to $8 billion a year. And obviously, degradation of natural infrastructure is also a contributing factor to our reduced resilience to flooding and erosion. So, one of the things that we're looking at is how we use natural systems to reduce risk and to reduce costs to society of coping with disasters or natural hazards, and how when we have to react to them rather than actively planning to them. Next slide, please. So, and we're also seeing a lot more attention to valuing ecosystem goods and services. So these are the services that nature-based solutions provide to people that benefit us, that we are less tangible than financial, kind of often traditional monetary benefits that we make include in our cost benefit analyses. So these might think things like provisioning, for example, fish or shellfish, regulation and support, flooding, erosion control. Obviously, that's what we're talking about today mainly, but also air and water quality, temperature control, carbon storage and sequestration, obviously receiving a lot of attention because of trading in carbon markets and offsets and the race to net zero, as well as biodiversity, local biodiversity and habitat enhancement. And then not forgetting that obviously the cultural benefits of nature, which I think in COVID times have been very much pushed to the fore. Things like recreation opportunities, aesthetic value, spiritual and education opportunities. And these are just not services that are generally offered by grey infrastructure, but yet sometimes we don't really effectively figure them into our option appraisal process when we're choosing how we should cope with coastal risks. Next slide, please. And I think that there is more awareness of how these are part of the economy. Probably many of you saw the Descapta review that came out last year, which was a kind of a landmark publication from the UK, which really pictured ecosystems as a fundamental basis of our economy, and also, the key interactions between what we traditionally think of our economy, which what you might call produced capital, but also how that interacts with human capital. So natural capital, produced capital, and human capital working together as the economy, rather than seeing it as the economy separated from nature. And with ecosystems, both biodiversity, which we obviously see a lot of attention to biodiversity because it's very important, but also the abiotic processes that are part of nature, which also provide ecosystem services to people and enable kind of traditional the produced capital to be produced. So I think this is helping us in how we think about nature and its worth to us, because we haven't traditionally valued it in monetary terms. So it's kind of setting us straight a little bit on our value system. Next slide, please. As I said, it's not a choice between grey and natural solutions. And this was very much part of the work that we've been doing here in Canada. This publication came out at the end of last year. So looking at basically how we can use grey and nature-based solutions, whether they be sediment-based or predominantly vegetation-based, how they can be used to achieve multiple benefits, and the fact that in many cases, actually, grey infrastructure may be required to enable nature-based solutions where we have actually already modified the solution, the processes that are occurring. For example, if we want to restore a dune or a beach environment, but there's no sediment supply, then we may need to use grey infrastructure to create conditions to supply that sediment or to hold the sediment that we have in a more stable position. So there are kind of ways that we can facilitate nature-based solutions by providing the right conditions, and also that nature-based solutions can be used to enhance grey infrastructure. So even if we are going to use grey infrastructure solutions because of higher density wave environments, for example, then actually, we may be able to also use natural infrastructure alongside or as part of those solutions as well. Next slide, please. So I think there's increasing recognition of this, and in Canada, we are particularly seeing a broadening of the view of what is infrastructure. So we are actually developing a national adaptation strategy at the moment, and there is a table that's called Resilient Natural and Built Infrastructure. So really considering both types of infrastructure together. Our national infrastructure assessment that we will be completing in the coming the coming year, will be covering all sectors, including natural infrastructure. So that will be included as infrastructure there. And we have a specific fund from Infrastructure Canada to fund natural infrastructure in particular. So all kind of signals that nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure are being considered more in terms of the services they offer to our people. Next slide, please. And I think, making a case for nature-based solutions and their co-benefits up front is very much part of upscaling and accelerating their implementation. So obviously there's a lot of key benefits from nature-based solutions that we've already mentioned. And there's a lot of movement I've seen kind of in Canada and internationally towards modeling the monetary value of these these benefits so that we can compare options on and their benefits more robustly, considering all the benefits, not just those that are easy to put in a dollar value or a pound value or a euro value. So these are things like modeling in Invest, for example, which many people in the room may have used also. Looking at predicted changes in indicators that can be kind of semi-quantitative or ranking kind of analysis. Use of the social value of carbon. And also, obviously, we look at avoided costs. But we're still not as strong sometimes at representing or kind of measuring these or anticipating these benefits. So when we had a workshop recently when we were preparing the coastal report, we asked people how strongly they thought we were at measuring physical, biological, and social outcomes. And you can see the triangle that came out of that discussion. So pretty middling about physical and biological outcomes, but much less strong on measuring social outcomes. So those kind of recreational or aesthetic values, we're not necessarily as strong at that sometimes. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to present a quick example from Percé in Quebec, which is a project that there's a group called Renas here in Quebec that basically did a more robust cost-benefit analysis for the Alpes Sud, which is very much a tourist town. I guess it's Percé is a touristic town because you can maybe see on the small photo there is a nice coastal archway that people really love to come and see, and it's part of very much a kind of a road trip route around the coast of Quebec. So it's a very popular destination, but it was it's suffering very serious erosion and flooding issues as well with sea level rise. So Renas considered 5 alternatives, considering things like a concrete seawall, a riprap, a rubble mound revetment, but also beach replenishment and a more kind of nourishment system, including they did look at using groins as well. But they cost benefit analysis compared non-intervention to these different options over they considered a 50-year time frame. And they tried to look at things like the economic value of gain in tourism revenues, for example, improvement of fish spawning grounds, recreational use, quality of life, and improvement of the landscape. So they tried to put these into monetary terms. And when we considered these benefits, which actually the benefit cost ratio was 68:1 for the beach replenishment scheme versus much lower for the more traditional engineering schemes looking at kind of hard wall protections. And a particularly large benefit from the tourist industry. So I think it stresses that when we take these multiple benefits into account, things that work more with natural processes can be far more beneficial than we would otherwise think if we're just looking at traditional financial values. Next slide, please. The other thing that's going on in Canada that I'd like to kind of share with you is natural asset management. So Canadian local governments and municipalities are looking at inventory and valuing their natural assets, and also developing standards for how they identify them and reflecting the value of those assets in their financial statements. So that is obviously a positive thing. If we see the benefit of nature-based solutions on balance sheets, then obviously that pushes home the value. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to move into our panel now, and thoughts to build on that I would like to kind of put out there before we do that is, so the use and valuing of nature-based solutions is maturing, but it's not yet a mainstream solution. So maybe we can be thinking about how we can change this. Strategic and long-term approaches are key, but we're not always taking them in all places. Local governments and communities are important in managing and valuing natural assets. And the absence of perfect approaches should not get in the way of incorporating good practice to accelerate nature-based solutions and implementation, because essentially we don't have time to be perfect necessarily, and maybe good and good best practice is, you know, good enough to get us moving. So just some thoughts. So to build on these thoughts, we're really lucky to have a panel of international experts joining us from around the world. We have some questions to discuss, but as I said, we're not tied to a script, and we're really hoping that our audience members online and in Groningen can actively join in the discussion. I can actually see that the chat is fairly busy. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but maybe I'll have a look while everyone is just presenting to you. So we're going to start off by considering specific case study examples from around the world and lessons that we can learn from them. So I'm joined by Albert Vos, who is the project manager for the intergovernmental project IBP Vlud in Emsdola, that I looked up actually, and I realized that that also means high tide or flood tide in Dutch. So that's great, and a great acronym. Well done on that. I'm also joined by, I'm just going to introduce the presenters, and then they're going to run through a kind of a 3-minute perspective presentation so that you know where they're coming from. We also have Ulrich, who's the associate professor in landscape architecture and planning at the University of Copenhagen, bringing some examples from Denmark. On a Capitaine Didier Cobourg, qui est le conservateur de la marine protégée de Saint-Louis au Sénégal, et aussi du Sénégal, nous avons à l'entour de Moussa Sall, qui est le coordinateur de l'Observatoire régional du littoral ouest africain à Dakar. Et puis, on a une quatrième personne qui est we have Paul Sayers of Sayers and Partners, who brings a real wealth of experience in adapting cities and coastal areas in the UK. So these are our 4 panelists. So firstly, I'm going to ask each of you to run through in about a few minutes, just presenting your key perspectives on nature-based solutions, your project, or where you're coming from, before we drill down on elements that really support successful implementation of these projects. So maybe we can start with you, Albert, if you can.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now, correct?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah, good morning, good evening, where you are. My name is Albert Vos, project manager at the program of ED 2050, Eemsdollard 2050. Here on the map, you can see where it is all about. It's the northern part of the Netherlands. Maybe you can show the first slide. That's more helpful in this case. No, the green map, but yes, that one. Yeah, we don't have mountains here in the Netherlands, and instead we have a low-lying coastal zone behind the dikes, the hard coastal line, and the main goals are here in some, and we try to construct here and investigate in a climate adaptive coastal zone, and we have now 14 projects in this region, from the harbor of Eemshaven until the border of Germany, and we also collaborate with Germany to see it as a one system, what it is in essence. And the essence of this program is to make use of the surplus of silt in the estuary, because of the economy which has dredge. There is a surplus of silt because of the dredging and the economy in the region. On the other hand, maybe the next slide is helpful in that way. We have a low-lying coastal zone with problems as peat oxidation, soil extraction, and soil subsidence. And we try to combine those 2 elements to turning different challenges into opportunity. Into 3 aims to make use of a natural silt trap, which you can see as ecosystem services, but also make use in an artificial way to make use of the dredged sediment to raising agricultural land, which is also subsiding. and also to raping clay to enforce dikes where it can be a soft line, you can say. So the core aim is to develop together with the local community and the parties in the region a healthy climate adaptive coastal zone in both an economic and an ecological way. So that's the core line of this program. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Albert. Maybe we can go on with now with Ole.
Yes, hello, this is Ole Freit reporting from Copenhagen, Denmark. Next slide, please. Copenhagen is the capital city of Denmark. It's a coastal city and it's prone to flooding, in particular storm surges from the south. To address that, there are discussions about how to protect the city. In particular, there's a discussion about a 50-kilometer long necklace surrounding the city, which is a blue-green coastal infrastructure system that also protects the city. There are 3 existing precedents in this area. Next slide, please. To the south, it's the Køge Bay Beach Park, which was inaugurated in 1980. It's a 70-kilometer beach park with coastal lagoons, 3 marinas, and also, it's also a storm surge barrier. The second generation is the Amager Beach Park, which is from 2005, closer to the city center and a part of an urban revitalization project in the western part of Copenhagen. And what is the most recent part of this is a new land reclamation project and urban expansion project of the city center of Copenhagen called Lynetteholm. And it's just in the very early stages, but construction is actually ongoing. It's also heavily debated in terms of the level of sustainability in this approach and this project. But at the end of the day, these 3 examples do show some precedents of how to approach this in Danish context. So next slide, please. Some of the key messages from the first precedent is that it was actually, an example of a Nordic welfare state flagship project led by the Social Democratic Party at the time, and about providing access to recreational landscapes and creating landscapes in proximity to new urban development areas. Next slide. The current discussion in a Danish context is about what to do in the southernmost parts of the city, and there's a discussion about this Dragør living shoreline. There's been architectural competitions and so on, and what it actually shows is a succession of different nature-based solutions over time. It acknowledges the known unknowns, in particular the interactions between groundwater, stormwater, and seawater now and into the future. It also addresses the issue of coastal squeeze and a transformation of land and replacement of farmland into coastal wetlands into the future. And it also indicates a change from less is more to more is more, both in terms of land allocation, in terms of multifunctionality, in terms of financing, and also in terms of stakeholder involvement. This has been a very high level of community engagement. Actually, this project is 15 years into the process and nothing major has been built on the ground yet. Some of the issues for discussion is really the balancing of natural cost and benefits now and into the future. For instance, much of this land is covered by Natura 2000 legislation. So that's sort of the brief report from here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ole. Maybe maintenant, Didier, vous pouvez donner quelques perspectives initiales. Didier? Oui, je vous entends, mais assez petit le son.
Allô, vous m'entendez maintenant?
Oui.
Vous m'entendez bien?
Ok, oui, on vous entend, mais la vidéo est un peu bizarre, mais oui.
C'est bon. C'est bon comme ça?
Ok.
Voilà, donc moi je m'appelle Didier Cabot, donc je suis le conservateur de l'aire marine protégée de Saint-Louis au Sénégal. Donc je vais vous faire la présentation et je serai accompagné par le docteur Moussa Sall du CSE. qui est le coordinateur du projet Adaptation. Donc là, nous allons partager avec vous des expériences. Donc, sur la reconstitution binaire à Saint-Louis. Bon, en effet, cette expérience entre dans le cadre donc, des solutions d'adaptation ou de lutte contre les risques côtiers. N'est-ce pas? Ainsi, pour la mise en œuvre de cette activité, donc nous avons été accompagnés par plusieurs partenaires que nous ne pouvons pas ne pas citer. Bon, il y a le CSE, il y a le Conservatoire du littoral français, il y a le CFM, et éventuellement le comité de gestion, donc, qui est l'instance qui regroupe les communautés et en même temps donc, les agents de l'État. Voilà. Donc maintenant, nous allons directement vous présenter un peu la solution. Donc c'est une solution, donc, comme vous le voyez sur l'écran, sur la photo à gauche. Donc c'est des typhas. Les typhas, c'est une plante envahissante, donc c'est aussi au Sénégal, au niveau du fleuve, donc qui bouche les couloirs vraiment de navigabilité du fleuve et tous les cours d'eau. Donc c'est une plante qui fatigue beaucoup les Sénégalais et que nous avons récolté, séché, et nous en avons fait des palissades, donc, et que nous avons installé au niveau de la partie qui est souvent submergée pendant les fortes pluies. Donc, si vous voyez bien, je ne sais pas pour ceux qui connaissent bien lui, ils savent que la langue de Barbarie est cherchée entre l'océan Atlantique et le fleuve Sénégal. Donc, c'est une petite bande de terre où facilement on avait une forte érosion côtière, mais aussi des situations marines. Donc, il fallait amener une réponse, n'est-ce pas, à ces phénomènes. Donc, qui à la longue pouvait même amener des captures sur la langue de Barbarie. Donc, c'est dans ce sens-là que les gens ont travaillé à la reconstitution de la zone un peu. Et c'est dans ce sens que nous avons installé ces types. Donc, c'est des palissades de 2 mètres de long, 1 mètre de hauteur. Donc, ils sont fixés entre eux par des piquets de fil à eau. Et nous les avons installés donc, dans un premier temps sur une distance de 1,5 km, et suivant une direction nord-est. La direction nord-ouest, en fait, il fallait étudier et voir comment le processus de sédimentation se fait. Et les gens ont...
Didier, merci beaucoup. Le son est un peu trop difficile pour les interpréteurs. Alors, peut-être on va juste essayer de régler le problème, puis on vous revient avec des questions après, parce que en fait, les gens, ils entendent trop mal. Mais ils peuvent lire tout sur le projet, sur les diapos, puis je pense qu'on peut revenir avec les questions peut-être quand le son est mieux. So we're going to now move to Paul for his brief presentation. Can we move to Paul's presentation? Can we move the slides to Paul's presentation? And I don't know where Paul is, but we can move on, please. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Good to be here today. So I'm Paul Sayers, associate at Tyndall Centre and run my own consultancy. So if you just go back one slide, I'll just tell you the title of it. So I'll be thinking about the strategic response, what we've been doing on strategic responses. And I've called this a time for a transformational change at the coast. So next slide. So we undertook some recent work for the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment on flooding. And it's clear this graph is trying to show the total adaptation benefit against in the expected annual damage. And with climate change, if we look out to the 2080s, the big orange bar there is highlighting that the amount of risk we will be managing out through adaptation is due to grow significantly. And what that provides us is an opportunity to manage that risk in a more rounded way and proactively seek multiple benefits. And that's where nature-based approaches come in part of that adaptation story. So there's a lot of risk that we will be managing, increasing risk that we'll be managed in the future, regardless of how we do it. And if we do it proactively, we can move away from the conventional approaches where possible and do a more nature-based approach. So next slide. So the opportunity is significant, but we need to know a little bit more than that if we're going to do it successfully. So this piece of work here from a recent paper we published on the scale of the transformational challenge around England's coast is highlighting that not all places at the coast have equal challenge. On the left there, present day risks through to the 2080s on the right, darker the red, the greater the risk. So we need to be able to have foresight on where those locations are and where we might be able to implement an alternative, more transformational response. And where we do need to, we need to work obviously closely with communities in helping them respond to that challenge. But this is, if we can start that debate now about how we get there and where we go, that's a real discussion we need now. And next slide. And I thought just to highlight, if people don't know it, in the UK, there's this process called shoreline management planning, which are based on sediment cells, and they set out, hold the line, whether we're going to manage retreat, whether we're going to advance the line, or whether we're going to have no active intervention at any particular place around the coast. And they've been really a good vehicle, but they can do more because they can start being much more closely integrated with spatial planning, much more closely integrated with community collaboration and local authority collaboration to try and set out how we're going to manage the shoreline over the long term. And these approaches are being taken up in other countries as well. This idea of the shoreline management plan to set out how we want to respond to the coast, including where we want to adopt more nature-based responses to the coastal management. Okay, next and final slide. And one of the pieces of work we've been doing for an Interreg project around the North Sea coast, looking at how we manage the coastline around the North Sea. We've developing this approach called cloud to coast approach that sets out how we might think of moving towards a resilient society. And one of the aspects of that is this inclusive approach, how you connect communities into that discussion, a whole system. So how you think up and down drift in the coastline and in the associated catchment, and how you continue to adapt by having that long-term vision. So setting out that debate of where we want to go in the future is a real enabler of having innovative responses of how we get there.
Thanks, great. Thank you so much. So everybody for your presentations. We have time for discussion now, and there's already a lot of questions in the chat. If people want to ask questions in the room in Groningen as well, that would be great to hear from you. Maybe if someone can enter those questions in the chat. I'm having problems seeing the questions in the Google Doc, but I would love to hear from people in Groningen. So I was wondering for Ore, maybe there's like a long history of nature-based solutions in Denmark. How the ecosystem service benefits of the solutions, how are they being accounted for, and has that changed over the years?
Thanks.
That's a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, one can say that this approach to nature-based solution in coastal areas is kind of the second wave of nature-based solutions as a climate change adaptation approach in the Danish context. 20 years ago, there was the same emerging discussion regarding stormwater management, from stormwater management predominantly done in sewers to also now on the urban surface using sustainable urban drainage systems, both vegetated and non-vegetated, as a integrated part of the urban landscape. And that has also created then, well, there's been a 20-year transition process. There's been mindset changes in legislation, and now it's more or less a kind of a new normal in the Danish context when it comes to stormwater management. And now for the past 5-6 years, we've been on the same trajectory when it comes to coastal areas. We've made a review. Still, more than 80% of all projects that are being discussed are kind of conventional hard coastal protection measures, flood walls, dikes, sluice gates, and so forth. But there have also been some initiatives. For instance, a larger philanthropic trust have invested in 20 different cities, supported municipalities to develop projects that are kind of challenging the conventional approaches. And that has actually resulted in a process where things are starting to change. For instance, I presented this Køge Bay Beach Park, which is 40 years old, but that's kind of been rediscovered as an interesting and relevant business case to review. When it comes to nature-based solutions, there's actually also a practical issue regarding the financing aspects. In Denmark, coastal protection is based on a beneficiary pays principle. And if the public sector needs to co-finance, it needs to be for the greater good of society at large. So when it comes to some recreational benefits, public access to beaches, environmental gains, educational value, human health benefits, and so on, some of the intangible values, those are actually arguments for public co-financing. So there have been made models and assessments which actually document those intangible values, and nature-based solutions seem to harness many of those multiple benefits more than conventional approaches.
That's really interesting, because I think the financing and capturing private financing is something that many countries are very much looking at the moment, because a lot of financial companies are very much more interested in natural capital also. That's really interesting. I might come back to you on that. So Paul, I was wondering from a UK perspective, whether you could also comment on how the benefits of nature-based solutions are made to kind of make a long-term business case.
So the benefits, there's two versions that typically get included. They can be included in the multi-criteria type assessment. So and then weighed up without monetarizing, or you can try and attempt to incorporate it in a monetarized way through various ways of valuing it, contingent value methods, willingness to pay methods, etc. And you are able to incorporate those, but they're always incorporated from a public funding perspective. So at the coast, most of our work is done from a public funded perspective, a little bit of private, but it always comes from the public good. So you have to think about it from a national public economic perspective. But in our choices at the coast, we have what's called a priority weighting system, and one of those weights is the environmental improvement. So you can incorporate amenity benefits, access benefits, as well as benefits to nature itself in the process. However, saying that, it is quite more difficult to incorporate nature-based benefits into the hard calculations alongside the economic benefits. So there tends to be a little mismatch between the weight of the evidence given to those two things, because we are more used and more able to value those more traditional economic benefits than we are the nature-based benefits. But it's not straightforwardly on an economic benefit case. You can make the case for these wider benefits, but it's on a project by project basis.
Great, thanks for that, Paul. Maybe I'm also, so that money is one thing, obviously, to get a successful project on the ground, and there's a lot of people interested in funding, so I might come back to the funding question, but I just wanted to ask what other elements are kind of key in helping the project go forward. I was wondering if Albert could answer that, particularly since your project is more innovative, kind of what has been key to kind of getting that successfully on the ground, other than money?
Other than money, now we use sediment in the system nearby, so it's a circular principle, you can say, that we combine the problems to opportunity, what I said. And farmers in the region are very enthusiastic to receive the sediment to raising their agricultural land to give them a perspective for the future. Yeah, that's a benefit that it's not only into money, you can say.
So yeah, that's great, because it's kind of using something that's seen as not useful, but making it useful, right? So the circular economy idea is also a great opportunity. Didier, je ne sais pas si vous nous entendez, si le son est mieux. Est-ce que le son marche maintenant?
Oui, c'est bon, c'est bon.
OK, ça c'est bon. OK, maintenant je vous entends. Je voulais aussi demander un peu la même question au Sénégal, à part l'argent. Quel était le facteur très important pour l'implémentation des projets de restauration des dunes?
Voilà, merci pour la question. Moussa, doyen?
Oui.
Moussa Sall?
Oui, merci beaucoup, capitaine. Bonjour à tous.
Voilà, c'est bon, allez-y.
Oui, moi c'est Moussa Sall du Centre psychologique de Dakar, donc qui est sur la tutelle technique du ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable. Et je coordonne en même temps l'Observatoire régional du littoral ouest africain qui est en train d'être mis en place. Donc, sur le projet au niveau de la langue de Barbarie, je crois que l'un des facteurs clés de réussite, c'est que nous sommes dans une zone protégée, une aire marine protégée, avec une équipe de gestionnaires qui est sur place, qui a déjà beaucoup d'expérience dans ce genre d'activité. Et ensuite, il y a eu une combinaison d'actions avec le projet WACA, avec l'unité de gestion du projet WACA au niveau du Sénégal, qui a complété également les activités en renforçant certains dispositifs de protection du milieu qui réduisaient un peu l'accès anarchique qui existait auparavant. Ensuite, il y a eu la disponibilité du matériel local. Le capitaine Kabou a parlé un peu du TIFA, ce matériel local qui était disponible, une plante envahissante, qui a été utilisée effectivement pour mettre en place ce dispositif-là. Et enfin, l'aire marine protégée, l'équipe de l'aire marine protégée a aussi bénéficié d'un appui technique du Conservatoire du littoral de France pour mettre en place cette technique qui a été présentée par le capitaine Kabou. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Moussa. Okay, now I think I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat and on the Google Doc, which I can now see. Thank you very much for that. One person, which I think is a very interesting question, which I'm hoping Paul can maybe help us answer, is does the 10% target for biodiversity net gain already show an impact in how we're using nature-based solutions along the coast in the UK? And I think that's something that I find interesting because it's, having to demonstrate net gain in biodiversity is hopefully going to make a difference. Paul?
Yeah, I think it will make a difference. That's definitely another excellent driver to what kind of choices are made in different places. The challenge is always in locations where you're also trying to protect people as well. It's definitely a driver for those places where there's opportunities to improve, to reinstate salt marsh in agricultural areas where you can realign. Even there, it's quite tricky, as we've heard from earlier speakers. And there's definitely that target for net gain is definitely strengthening the case for that. It's more difficult in places where there's a more direct influence on property and people. So we've got a few places around the coast where that discussion of realignment is taking place. And I wouldn't say the net gain plays into those places. It plays into increasing the case for realigning in places where you're more agricultural based or much more sparsely populated. But it definitely is featuring. I'm not sure it's yet featured, but it is definitely featuring in the discussions.
Thanks so much. Hey, maybe I'm interested to explore the local community aspect. You kind of, we are protecting people in many of these coastal projects. So I wanted to just go back to Ole and ask how Denmark's citizens' attitude or level of involvement has changed. And because you have a series, a rich history in Denmark. I've just wondered how people's attitudes have changed towards these kind of solutions.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, first of all, there is this beneficiary pays principle. It means that at the end of the day, it's the local community that need to pay themselves, and the organizing cooperatives, where that the municipalities can be facilitators and they can be do some co-financing. But at the end of the day, the local communities need to agree on a technical solution and also financing model for that, or to how much the cost would be. But things are actually changing. I showed this example of Lynetteholm in the northern part of Copenhagen, where there's a lot of opposition, public debates about whether this is sustainable. What about the marine ecosystems? How are they affected by this land reclamation project? So it seems actually that there's some kind of a battle, or we're at a crossroad between human interests, kind of human-centered economic interests, and then environmental interests. It's been seen in that particular project in Copenhagen, but there's also another case which was finalized 2-3 years ago after 8 years of a legal battle between environmental interests and human-centered interests. So there seems to be an increased recognition about the environmental impacts of the need to actually acknowledge non-human species in developing sustainable solutions in coastal areas, and the public, the general public, has a very strong voice in this.
Great. And in terms of maybe if we can go to Albert, sorry, I'm going all French on you. I just wondered what the local farmers and agricultural community, what they think about the innovative project that you're doing.
Yeah, what I said, they are very enthusiastic about the opportunity that they have, that they can have a perspective. But there is also a need for renewing the way of agricultural action in this region. So it has to be also in balance with nature in this region. So therefore, we try to make a kind of a landscape plan for a balanced functioning of agricultural activities and natural activities, natural benefits. So they see the urgency, and they support us so far. So that's a good news, and we try to create building blocks and to determine together a plan for this region in the future.
Great, thank you. Well, at this point, I'd just like to bring in a couple more people to the discussion. We have a couple more people, experts on the line who are joining us. So we have Floris Bulgar, who's a senior consultant at Delta, as well as lecturing at Hans University of Applied Sciences in Groningen. We have Arona Sumar, who is Principal Climate Change and Regrowth Officer at the African Development Bank, and Vicky Lin, who is Project Manager at Blue 21, also in the Netherlands. So I wanted to, so we've been talking a lot about kind of some specific case studies and projects. But I'm wondering, maybe if I come to you, Floris first, if you can reflect on some of the key policy recommendations that we should be making, building on the case studies and discussion we've already had, in order to really upscale and replicate these nature-based solutions in other areas and to kind of spread out the good work.
Yeah, thanks. It was really interesting to see all those case studies around the world. Actually, some of them I have been involved as well. I think key for legislation or policy is always the evidence-based part. So what you hear now as well, we should do more research on the cost benefits, because that's a barrier. there's a lot of doubt about implementing nature-based solutions, large scale or small scale, because there's not awareness. So you have to raise awareness or capacity building or a wider understanding for it. Because if I hear all the case studies, mostly we don't understand fully enough that it's really multidisciplinary. It's not only about green or gray, as you say, but there's policymakers, there are people that have to do the maintenance. It's about blue, it's about a lot of colors actually, and they have to work together. So I think that's very key. So coming from a research environment, most of the things that is going on in these case studies, of course, is make it evidence-based and then return it to policy, because that's helping to take the right decisions in this case. So so that would be key for policy, is do more research and share international examples. That's what we're doing now, of course, and raising awareness and capacity building is quite important.
And I'm wondering, so many places we're still going to kind of traditional engineering solutions as the first go-to, and then we're kind of thinking, oh, maybe we could do something more innovative. What would you say to kind of communities that are really starting from engineered solutions in a traditional way?
Yeah, from my experience, a lot of examples do help. When I graduated from the University of Delft, I spent time in Bangladesh, where mainly the Dutch were making dikes, very hard, gray infrastructure, so to say. And actually, the residents from that area broke the dikes because there was not fresh soil on the land. No fish ponds were filled up again. So there was a lot of resistance to that. And we paid so much money and capacity and cost and everything. So we did some damage as well with gray infrastructure. And I think that should be stressed. And that's not that gray infrastructure will replace by green infrastructure, of course not. But I think these stories people relate to, and that really helps to tell the story. And it's about, well, ecosystem services, as you presented. It's about water quality. It's about so many benefits. So if we really share those benefits, there's a wider understanding for why we should do this, and it would help to implement more nature-based solutions, I would say. Yeah.
And presumably we also need to make space for nature-based solutions, sometimes through things like the avoid, like zoning, and kind of making sure that we're making space where we haven't already encroached, and retreating where we can't, where it's unattainable, I guess, like kind of unsustainable in the long term to stay. We're kind of in Canada, we're having these kind of discussions too at the moment. Okay, maybe we can move to you, Vicky. One element that I know is being explored in several areas is floating homes in cities, and actually at the University of Waterloo, where I work, we have the Buoyant Foundation project, which is kind of looking exactly at that. So I was just wondering, is our coastal future floating as we host sea level rise? Is there a place for that?
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, definitely. As you also mentioned that we need to look at the strategic and long-term approaches to deal with the future challenges. And there's actually no perfect solutions, but we need to experiment the different good practice and to see how different contexts will respond to them. And also to build upon what Paul introduced, that there's an increasing risk that we are facing, and we will have to experiment more and to look at all alternatives. And currently, we see a lot of coastal cities that face challenges such as land scarcity or urbanization and overpopulation. The most conventional way for them to find a space is through land reclamation. But actually, land reclamation can be quite detrimental to the ecosystem. Imagine, having the whole seabed just covered by rocks and sand. And yeah, I mean, with all respect, but Ola, you introduced the Lenita home from Copenhagen. You also mentioned that the environmental aspects have been quite controversial. And this actually, in the case of Denmark, you're also lucky to have the material. However, for some other coastal cities that seek for land reclamation solutions, but without having those sand or soil materials, they will have to find the material elsewhere. And this actually encourages the rise of a sand mafia from more developing countries. And so if you look at the land reclamation and floating solutions, actually in the long term, then reclamation also is not as adaptive as a floating house or floating community, as it will adapt to changing water levels, and it actually also creates extra habitat for the ecosystem. And coming back to also what the Floris mentioned, that in response to legislation and rules, it's very important to have evidence. And Blue 21, we also have a sister company called Indymo, which does on water quality and ecology monitoring using aquatic drones. So drones that would collect data and also images from activities underneath the floating structure. And if you're interested, I invited you to visit the website of Indymo. There's an open access database on different evidence collected from different floating cases around the world. You could see that actually floating does have a positive environmental impact in comparison to land reclamation.
Great, thanks, Vicky. I'm just going to go to some of the questions. We have a few questions in the chat and the Google Doc now. So one question that is comment intégrer les connaissances traditionnelles des peuples autochtones à cette nouvelle approche basée sur la nature. Peut-être je vais prendre cette question moi-même parce que on a beaucoup de discussions en ce moment au Canada sur la réconciliation et décolonisation avec les groupes autochtones. Puis, de mon expérience personnelle avec les discussions, les Autochtones, c'est pas une nouvelle approche pour eux. Parce que eux, ils ont travaillé avec la nature, c'est comme la base de la vie. Puis le système de valeurs, comme ils m'ont expliqué, c'est que la nature est vraiment en haut. Puis c'est le plus important pour eux, c'est pas l'argent. Alors c'est comme un système de valeurs complètement différent que le nôtre. Puis il se voit moins dans nos paysages, en fait, qu'on sépare la nature de les communautés, puis on protège ou on sépare. Puis l'approche basée ou fondée sur la nature, en fait, ils voient plus comme une... Ils m'ont expliqué qu'ils voient ça comme une façon de reconnecter avec la nature, reconnecter avec la terre, se revoir dans les paysages autour du Canada, de retourner à des façons de faire qu'ils avaient l'habitude, en fait, avant la colonisation. Je ne suis pas autochtone, mais c'est pour des expériences que les gens ils ont partagées avec moi pendant les discussions. Alors, c'est la question. Je sais pas si d'autres membres, does any of the other panel members wish to comment on involving traditional knowledge from Indigenous groups? I don't know whether anyone else has experience with this. If not, we will move on to another question. We have time for a couple of more questions, I think. I'm just looking to see what else we have. We have a question on forced migration, or I guess and relocation, and how we can manage this on the coast. And I think this is a growing conversation of kind of when it's unsustainable and when we actually need to think about retreat. I don't know who is somebody on the panel has experience of retreat. Maybe Paul. I think in the UK we've had several managed retreat projects go ahead, and several of those SMP sections are actually either do nothing or retreat now, right? What's the conversation been like around that?
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. There are places where we've had managed realignment. Largely, they haven't as yet influenced or impacted too many people, but there are live debates. So there's a well-known place in Wales on Fairborn, where it's a discussion around a managed realignment, moving from a hold the line to a managed realignment policy. And how do you actually do that? How do you support communities in making that transition, including financial support, and over the time scale, many years of how you actually do that. And we've recently published a paper exploring the scale of that challenge and the fact that it will take many, many years to transition from hold the line to managed realignment, and we need better mechanisms to support communities where that is the case. So far, managed realignment is identified in the SMPs. It's identified more than we are implementing, so it's identified in more locations than we are implementing. But the discussion around how you do that and how you support communities in that process, and the justice issues around that, and the how you do it fairly, are all central discussions. And we've got a series of what are called pathfinder studies to try and explore that, both in a coastal flood perspective and a coastal erosion perspective primarily. How do you make that transition? And that's a central focus for a series of funding that's just come out for so-called pathfinder studies to think about how you do that. To date, most of the discussion of realignment has been in places where it's agricultural land or more mobile, inherently more mobile homes, caravans, etc. There's the discussion when it's a well-established community, been there, had protection for many years. That debate is just getting going, but we are trying to highlight this need to have a real clear, honest discussion about how our risks will change in the long term with sea level rise, which isn't not a lot of uncertainty in sea level rise anymore. We can argue the quantum, but we're pretty sure it's going to be within a particular range, and how we respond to that is a real active discussion.
Great, thank you. So there's also a question in the chat about ecosystem accounting, which I find particularly interesting, because I think we're doing a fair bit of work in Canada in trying to get the benefits recognized in terms of the services they provide communities, and communities. We actually have I think about 40 odd different local governments that now have valued their natural assets and actually want to put them on their financial statements. At the moment, the Public Sector Accounting Board, there's a rule where we can't put inherited natural assets on our financial statements, which we're trying to reverse at the moment, so that people can actually have natural assets as a asset line in their financial position statement. And actually, it's not coastal, but the city of Calgary actually did this exercise and discovered that the fourth most valuable group of assets that they had were natural assets, which I think pushes it up the agenda. I just wondered whether any of the panel has experience on natural capital accounting and how that's influencing the discussion around nature-based solutions in your country. No?
Yeah, well, only that is gathering traction in the UK, and particularly that idea of natural assets and conventional assets all form part of an asset management perspective, and natural capital accounting is part of that story. So you were able to put natural features alongside conventional infrastructure features, on a common way. That is definitely starting again to have impact. Great.
We have a comment in the chat also about some of the Indigenous groups. Tom says, in Building with Nature project in Indonesia, whether to restore the mangrove greenbelt and sustainable aquaculture. The local communities were actively involved from the start, and their knowledge was extremely valuable. And je voulais juste toucher sur ce point avec M. Didier, parce que je sais que dans nos discussions préliminaires, vous avez noté l'implication de la communauté dans les projets de restauration au Sénégal et au Saint-Louis. Alors, je voulais voir si vous pouvez commenter sur le rôle de la communauté dans les projets que vous avez implémentés.
Pardon, s'il vous plaît, vous pouvez répéter la question, s'il vous plaît?
Je voulais juste voir si vous pouvez commenter sur le rôle de la communauté dans les projets de restauration.
Ah, d'accord, d'accord. Voilà, donc, au niveau de l'AMP de Saint-Louis, donc ce projet, comme l'a dit tout à l'heure le doyen Moussa Sall, sur les facteurs de réussite, donc il a un peu parlé donc de la structure qui existait déjà, qui est l'AMP. Mais l'AMP a un mode de gestion qui est basé sur une cogestion. Donc, il y a les communautés et il y a l'État. Maintenant, tout ce qui est prise de décision est fait de manière collégiale entre les communautés et l'AMP. Et c'est dans ce sens que les communautés sont en amont jusqu'en aval donc, de tout le processus de mise en œuvre de ce projet. Donc, ils sont des parties prenantes, notamment, ils sont des parties prenantes depuis la conception du projet, donc jusqu'à sa mise en œuvre en passant par le suivi qui est actuellement en train d'être fait. Bon, parce que les populations et les communautés avaient l'habitude d'utiliser cette zone-là pour faire du maraîchage. Mais avec le passage de la brèche, en 2003, cette zone a été complètement dégradée. Mais ils ont vu qu'il y a de l'intérêt derrière la mise en œuvre de ces tifavels qui a fait qu'on a pu piéger du sable, reconstituer des dunes et en même temps reconstituer les écosystèmes. Au-delà de ça, ils se sont installés donc maintenant en aval donc, de ces tifavels pour faire du maraîchage. Si vous voyez un peu la photo sur la diapo, la dernière photo, c'était des casiers où on a installé des maraîchers pour faire des activités socio-économiques. Et ils s'en sortent énormément puisque au temps, ces communautés étaient des pêcheurs. Maintenant, aujourd'hui, ils se sont reconvertis au maraîchage et ils trouvent que ils ont beaucoup plus de revenus en pratiquant ce maraîchage-là que la pêche où ils se retrouvaient avec des gains un peu plus petits. Donc, c'est dans ce sens que les populations se sont appropriées donc, cet outil. Quand les gens doivent installer ces tifavels, ils sont des parties prenantes et c'est eux-mêmes qui confectionnent ces tifavels donc, pour venir les vendre au projet. Donc, en retour, ils ont de l'argent donc, en vendant ces tifavels au projet. Ils sont des parties prenantes et ils se chargent aussi du suivi donc, de ces tifavels. Donc, je peux dire que surtout donc, la mise en œuvre du projet, ces populations, ces communautés ont été les fers de lance donc, pour la réussite de ce projet.
Excellent. Je pense que c'est un bon exemple de comment les projets basés sur la nature, ça peut insérer dans une économie locale, puis valoriser et amener autre chose. Et ça démontre aussi que la population s'adapte avec la nature, qu'ils ont changé de la pêche à la maraîchage. Alors, je pense que c'est un très bel exemple. Okay, well, we have a few minutes left. I'm just trying to see whether there's any other burning questions, and so I can read out some of the great comments in the chat. Some of them, a lot of interest in the financial side, so it's a shame we don't have a bit more time to talk about that. There are also a lot of links in the chat that I recommend we'll try and capture somehow. I just wanted to say a few words before we do end that to try and sum up a little bit of the discussion. So I think from everybody, pretty much, I've heard about strategic approach that is kind of nested in natural processes, and the fact that we're kind of at a bit of a tipping point, it seems, between kind of having this as a innovative solution to kind of more towards the new normal solution. I think Ole mentioned in his presentation. So some countries are obviously more ahead of the game in this area than others, and we can learn from each other. Also, that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. We've heard about very different projects in different regions of the world, and the importance for them to be kind of beneficial to people, and I guess in a sense place-based projects that take into account the where they're situated and the people living there. I have a comment that maybe green and gray make dark green. So maybe with these hybrid solutions, like in some ways, nature-based solutions or purely nature-based solutions may not be attainable, but maybe these dark green solutions are something that we can achieve. So something, maybe making the benefits clear. We've had a lot of discussion about how this is. I think that the local economy discussion, the examples of Didier and also of Albert, of how there we're looking at more at the circular economy and benefits from these nature-based solutions really to the local people that are living with the solutions. And I think it's incredible. We're still finding innovative ways to work with natural processes. Natural processes are natural, but we're still evolving in how we work with them. And I think one thing that always strikes me is not all innovation is technology. So, and this is not necessarily technology, but it's more kind of understanding how we can work with natural physical processes. So when we say innovation, sometimes we always think of kind of machines and electronics, but it's this is the opposite, which I fully embrace, definitely. So this has been a really stimulating discussion. And I'm kind of sad that the time is kind of finishing, to be honest, because this is kind of what I live and breathe, and it's why I do my job. So it's been great. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your time and for providing your perspectives from around the world. And I'm sure, if people want to follow up, they can search you out on LinkedIn and ask you the questions. We haven't got to quite the end of the questions, but we can continue the discussion. So this event has been organized by the Water Adaptation Community of the Global Center on Adaptation. So there is a chance to continue the discussion online. You can join the community, you can contribute your materials to the community, provide your resources, join the discussions, and contribute. And I really think that this demonstrates how by sharing knowledge between the Netherlands, Denmark, the UK, Senegal, Canada, we can actually try and pinpoint some examples. I think what Flores said about having examples in our pocket to show how this works and how this can work better. Is also, so when we share our examples, we kind of broaden the evidence base that this works and can help really solidify our arguments when we're fighting their corner for this, because I know not everybody is on the same wavelength at the moment. So the summary and the recording of the webinar will be available on the Water Adaptation Community website. And I would really encourage you to join that community and take active part. And the discussion with the private sector stakeholders in Groningen will now continue in Dutch, and that's on until 4 o'clock local time. Thank you so much to all our panelists for your time, and for our hosts and all the people in the audience who've asked so many great questions. And personally, I would love to hear from you more. If you want to talk about this, I'm the person you can always talk about it to, because this is kind of my career drive, is to basically get these things implemented more in Canada as well now. So anything you can provide to help me do that, I will be very, very much receptive. So so thank you to everybody. Merci, and I can't, sorry, I don't know, thank you in Dutch. It's been great, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Pasti.